My first accident, I fell off awkwardly and kind of knackered the tendons either side of my knee. And I felt like it was a major achievement actually, just managing to bike uphill with one leg and the other one wobbling around in the wind. One of them was at Recastle. I fell off a route called the Torture Board and landed on top of my friend and broke my ankle then. A couple of years ago in Scotland, a hole snapped on me on a route and I fell about 10 metres and had to hop down the hillside. I'm not really into the utter embarrassment being rescued by the mountain rescue, so I think I'd rather somebody would bury me there and not be brought down by the mountain rescue. Would be a fate worse than death, I'm sure.
I think if you can, you just sort of have to trust that he can do it. And I think generally he does, you know, he just gets on with it and does it. And if you can just switch your brain off and think, yeah, he's just going to do it, not really think about it, that's the way to get through the belaying with the minimum of pain. But yeah, it's worrying, and it takes a lot of mental energy as well, and it takes a lot of mental energy away from your own climbing. So after belaying, like on Return of the King, and when we went round to do an E2, and I bottled it, and we went up a mild VS instead. So yeah, it doesn't make a good climbing day for both of you when he's doing something rather scary.
Okay. You kind of feel, yeah, I suppose you're kind of with him when he's doing it, aren't you? And that kind of drains you as well.
Yeah, you are kind of, your hands are sweating and you can almost feel yourself like shaking out, where he's shaking out, and I can even feel my hands sweating now. Yeah, it's one that on Scarfell, that Welcome to the Cruel World, he was completely focused on that. I had like 2 days practice on it, and then went up the third day, first day with the top rope, and yeah, just did it, like, and he came back and he's like, oh yeah, I did it. It's like, bloody hell, that's quite good. Yeah, he gets up them fast. And yeah, just seems to have a good head for it, you know, he can just make himself do it.
Yeah, and not get too overcome by what might happen.
Yeah, no, he seems to be able to focus entirely on, I don't know, on succeeding. He doesn't worry so much about failing. Well, he doesn't seem to, you know.
No.
I don't know what his secret is, but...
No, maybe it's just not kind of thinking about it all too much.
To be honest, to be perfectly honest, he's actually probably does more tours than I do, but then he does a lot less hours at work. I'm upgrading him. I've been thinking about upgrading him for a model that does chores as well, and belays. I'm not too bothered about the climbing. Yeah.
Seen enough of that now, really, haven't we?
Yeah. No, I love it that he climbs and we climb together, you know, he's my best climbing partner, definitely. No, what else? Yeah, well, he fell off that route in, on top of this mountain, and I think it's called Garben, or you can't put that in because I don't know how you pronounce it. But yeah, he fell off this E5, I think he just snapped a hold and he was like 6 or 7 metres up, and he just like, 1 minute he was climbing, the next minute he was just like falling and landed on the ground. That was pretty horrible because he snapped something in his ankle, and it was like an hour and a half walking. And there were some other people at the crag, and I was like, oh, we go ask him for help, and he's like, no. He just like taped up his ankle like that. And yeah, we walked down. But that was... No, the thing was, I had 2 right-hand shoes or 2 left-hand shoes, because I had fucked my rock shoes up, so I had 2 of the same foot, so I wasn't leading anything anyway.
No, not unless it was like
in 2 right-hand shoes.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Unless it was like a rightward tending down.
I suppose that was one of his day's first routes where we were kind of touching common ground, but after that, you know, I think he's gone into a kind of a new realm of climbing, really. I certainly felt was, well, we never even thought it could be done, you know. I mean, there's, to me, that, like, Lost Horizons, Pete Lewis's route, I mean, that's a big route. Just getting up that felt quite something, you know, never mind about climbing those overhanging arêtes on either side, they just felt way out, really.
All these lines remain unrepeated.
I don't know. Well, obviously because they're bloody desperate and very, very serious. I think things have evolved really since 70s and 80s was, we had a kind of, well, certainly 70s, and it was like the golden age really of modern climbing in the Lake District. And suddenly people, you know, standards jumped up from like E2 to E5, almost pushing E6. But it's kind of all relatively well, it was new standard of difficulty, but it was all fairly relatively well protected. Our days moved the grade on, as you know, people have with sport climbing, but then he's gone on without, you know, protection of bolts and all the rest of it into these kind of blank, frightening places. And I don't think there's, well, I might be wrong, but there's not many, if anybody else has actually done that yet. You know, they're there technically, or just about, but they haven't managed that psychological step, as Dave has. My dad's roots, Dave's grandfather, Jim Burkett, he did Mayday climbing in 1938, and Dave and I reckon it's probably E2 5C technically. Now, you didn't get routes of that standard until the 60s, and they were using peg protection, you know. So that was like 20 plus years. But I don't think that will happen with Dave's routes. I think people probably do them fairly soon, really.
Because you've got similar grades with Gritstone, but they're just nowhere near as long. It's one of the things. But Indian Face just kind of stands out.
Yeah, absolutely. Indian Face really stands out, doesn't it? As being the great route, really, of that kind of decade, you know. And, yeah.
It's kind of the only one I could think of that's similar to the things that Dave's doing. The only thing, obviously, Dave's are just, they are technically much harder than Indian Face, I'd imagine, but not quite as stupidly bold as.
Well, different nature of climbing, harder and physically harder maybe, but you know, Indian Face psychologically, wow, what a big route, you know, tremendous. Well, again, I think it's that you know, cyclic kind of thing really. Dave came along when most people were turning to sport climbing, and you know, technically hard things, but that were safe and bolted, and Dave's taking it on really. It's kind of a lead where I think others will follow. I mean, I think there's a move around most of Europe now really to get back to adventure climbing, and people think, crikey, what have we done to all these crags, you know? I mean, where's the challenge anymore, even in the high Alps? And I think Dave's probably seen that in advance and you know, gone his own way. But I think, you know, the climbing world will catch up with that, I think. But yeah, I'm amazed really that he has been so alone. I mean, certainly, I think it might have been the same for when my dad was climbing really. It wasn't really people pushing at a high standard. I mean, when he first emerged, you were still the likes of Morris Linnell and Colin Kirk as very fine climbers with an eye for a fine line, but basically they were climbing VS, and then suddenly Dad was climbing E2. That's a huge leap.
But if you, the thing is, what interests me is going like the Peak District. There's like, you know, there's always like a race where the last great grit lines are. There's a race of several kind of top climbers competing. The same in North Wales, but that kind of scene seems to have evaporated from the lakes, really.
No, it's absolutely true, Alistair. Yeah, I don't know. I think 70s and 80s there was a big boom in the lakes of Lake climbing, and then it fell away remarkably quickly until, you know, when Dave kind of started seriously climbing, there wasn't that kind of competition or people to match him. And why it is, I don't know. I think it is in North Wales. I think there's more of a nucleus of climbing there, and certainly on the grit and all the rest of it. But as you say, you know, I think that kind of edge of competition has certainly for the last 10, 15 years has disappeared from the Lake District. I suppose the closer you get to that kind of cutting edge, that kind of, you know, the limit of stuff, it's obviously easy to be at the limit of stuff if you can turn up to an edge in the Peak District in you know, 5 minutes, where the rock's pretty going to be reasonably dry or whatever and clean, than it is to go up to you know, up to Scorfell in a couple of hours. But it's more than just the walk, it's the psychological edge. You know, up there obviously you've got lichen, moss. Even on a good day, you've probably seen it yourself. You know, it can be just a bit of humidity or something. The rock can be slippy and damp, and it's a really, you know, it's an extra kind of commitment. It's something else that's quite a big thing, really. You know, it really does affect that top end athletic and psychological performance, doesn't it? I've climbed quite a bit with Dave in the early days, you know, sport climbing, and at that time my limit was sort of, I was climbing okay, and but my limit was like 7B plus 7C, you know, on a good day, and Dave was pissing up stuff that I was pulling off, and he was just genuinely finding it like a stroll in the park. You know, I found it really annoying that he hadn't got a clue that he was climbing that kind of grade, you know, easily. Jim, myself, and Dave, really, above everything else, is kind of a love for mountains, a love for place, and I think that's the kind of tie between us, really. And he didn't really talk about his exploits or what he'd done, you know, and that was just the nature of him. It was a pretty quiet person, really.
Yeah, his achievements were for himself, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a Lakeland kind of thing, that, in a way. Well, Lakeland Dales people, I mean, I think, you know, you try and let your actions, you know, speak, your deeds speak for themselves, really. You don't need to kind of talk about them.
So he's just a natural talent, really. I guess some of them will. You know. But I don't know how long. I mean, you're probably talking a long time. I mean, things evolve, don't they? And climbers get stronger over the years, and maybe in, I don't know how many years, 10, 20 years, there'll be some young lad comes along, and he'll discover all these unrepeated Dave Burkitt routes, and you know, and he'll, you know, maybe somebody in the future will be able to repeat them. But you know, obviously he's not going to repeat them all, because it would be a lifetime's work, wouldn't it, just repeating them? Well, it's a lot of work. I mean, one thing you have to go to the top of the crag, find the belay, find the right line, abseil down, spend quite a bit of time looking at the routes, you know, and a lot of time on your own as well, actually, sort of pondering and thinking, because once you start doing it as well, and you start get that sort of glimmer of, well, this is on, then you start getting psyched as well. And so it's carrying all that through, you know. It happens a lot, doesn't it? People go out and they will maybe top rope something, but just making that progress onto leading it, this is what people don't do. Not really anybody, you know, like at the moment, just qualified to, or has really got this desire to do it, and desire is what you need, a big desire to do these routes. Because if you don't do them, you're going to probably die. It'd be a sad thing to do on some of your routes. But even if they did put 8 bolts in some of them, they probably wouldn't be able to do them anyway. No, he's one of the nicest lads you'll meet as well, that's the thing. He is. I mean, I've had spent, you know, days and days and hours, and he used to live with us as well, and you'll not meet a friendlier bloke either, you know. It's not like his head's swollen up with all this sort of ego. If you go climb with Dave, you'll have a good crack. He'll do, you know, do some good routes, and you know, just have a good day.
Well, I asked him when he repeated Breathless on Gable. You know, everyone was wanting to know what grade he thought it was, because he made the second ascent, and he kind of gathered that he thought it was easier than E10, but he wasn't going to say so. And I asked him directly. I said, "What grade do you think Breathless was, Dave?" And he said, "Well, I've never done an E10 before, so I'm not going to go around saying it is an E10." And that was all he'd say on it. And just pleased to have done the route, I think. It was interesting, Dave McLeod came down, but not to repeat one of Dave's routes, which have been there for years, but to repeat John Dunn's one, which is, I guess John got more publicity for his one than Dave has for his. The other thing is, I mean, when he does ring up to report a route, or when I finally found out he's done one and ask him about it, he's very honest about what he's done. If he's top roped it first, practice the moves, pre-placed gear, he'll give me a complete list of what he's done, which I think is also quite rare. But he doesn't really seem to do much in the way of pre-practicing, you know, maybe a couple of times on the top rope and then it's straight at it. And I get the impression if he had to spend much longer on it than that, he'd just get bored and give up and go and do something else. He's not that worried. Can't practice anything to the same extent. When his most recent one on Scafell, I mean, he was practicing it on a shunt in the rain, wasn't he? Just because it was the only way he could get it done. You can't imagine them doing that in the peak very often. Yeah, and going up on his own to do it because you just can't find anyone prepared to hold his ropes and things like that. I spent a bit of time looking through the guidebooks the other night and writing down the names of the people who've been really top performers in the lakes and since the sport began, and there's not actually, maybe about 20 of them all told have really made a mark, and Dave's definitely made it. You know, he's a full grade, 2 grades, climbing 2 grades harder, I think, than anyone else really who's been operating in the area on a regular basis. I get the impression he goes around repeating quite a lot of other hard routes that other people have done, but again, not making a great song and dance about it at all. I think he likes to be able to measure how he's doing in the lakes against the standards elsewhere in the country, and that's the main reason he does it. He's also remarkably selective. He's got the capability of climbing all sorts of things, but he only ever, when it comes to new routes, he only ever bothers with very hard things on the whole. I mean, I think he did an E3 on Pavey, but that's about as low as he's got. Everything else is E6, E7 and above. And there's not very many of them, but he's really made his mark with the new routes he's done. I think the rest of the time he just likes going repeating other people's routes. He's a real climber, complete enthusiast. I remember wandering into the old Dungeon Gill one night, and we'd just done Pluto, which is a hard VS on Raven Crag, and we were at the bar discussing the last pitch and saying it seemed very hard for 5A, and Dave came across and said, "Oh yeah, it's really hard for 5A, I think it ought to be E1," and we thought, how the hell does he know? But he genuinely felt that, he wasn't just saying it.
Kind of an awkward little sequence there. What happens here, Leo, is I can reach so far, but I just got to lunge the last little bit. Educated kiss, huh? Yeah.
My knowledge so far is the best rock climbers in the world are the people that can climb the highest in the quickest time with the least amount of fuss. Fuss as in dangers, hazards, risks and scariness. I'd expect them to keep me safe because they're experts at it and to keep me warm with plenty of soup.
So soup's important.
Yeah, soup keeps you warm and gives you fortification.
What do you know about climbers in the Lake District?
I didn't know people climbed in Lake District.
What kind of things do you think they climb?
They'd probably climb walls, lampposts and some kind of building. Finding a nice pub with genuine ales, having a right good look at lakes and making love. The Lake District, first discovered in the 13th century by Robert Duval.
I just love the smell of lava in the morning.
Many years ago, prior to the 13th century, major volcanoes erupted. Many animals died, just leaving mainly amoebas and some little cuttlefish. Now, the cuttlefish evoluted into arms and legs things, which could be amphibious and also non-amphibious. In the water, out the water, any style you want to notch and alter. Then in the 1700s, the poets emerged and they brought to the lakelands all the mountains, streams, rivers and of course the lakes, including reservoirs and little ponds.
Yeah, I grew up at that farm, born at that farm, side house over there, and spent all my time with this grandfather, the shepherd, and obviously I knew about Bill the climber, and he lived in Ambleside, but for me, first couple of years, or first year or so climbing, I'd never ever met Bill, even though I knew he was like a very keen activist, and there was nobody who was like, oh, I've got to go and see him, and it was like this person who I never knew, so I went round to see him. And the friend who started, the guy who started climbing, he said it'd be a really good idea to you and Bill to go and do the 50th anniversary of Overhanging Bastion, which is like my grandfather's classic route.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh, well, I'll go and see him, and then we'll go out and do this, you know, maybe a great introduction. And then like, he was an asshole in the mags about it or whatever. So I went to see him.